Today on the Next, our guest is Brock Kautz. Brock is a former University of Minnesota goalie turned hockey player advisor. I got to Brock through Jack Ramsey, who was his teammate at University of Minnesota for 4 years, and Brock was also the best man in Jack's wedding. I was excited for this one because Brock has had a great journey. He had an extensive career in juniors where he capped his time with an NAHL championship for the Minnesota Wilderness. He was a scholarship player at University of Minnesota as a goalie. He did a stint at Bemidji State Division I program as assistant coach, and now he's working as a player advisor, advising emerging players on their paths within the game. We cover a lot in this episode, including Brock's journey, what it was like growing up in crazy Minnesota hockey. We talk about the role of parents in youth hockey and how that role has been shifting over time. We talk about the importance of multi-sport participation and the evolving landscape of hockey development. And we also talk about Brock's career transition into player representation and what he's learned by working with players and families, what the role of an advisor is, and how players should be thinking about navigating their own paths within the game. This is a great one, and I hope you enjoy it. Brock, welcome to the show.
Jason, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, and not always, but typically we do a prep call first and get to know each other and stuff. I mean, we just talked for a couple minutes before recording, but that was the extent of it. Although I did a long episode, I think it was like 90 minutes or something with Jack Ramsey, and apparently you were Jack's teammate at University of Minnesota and the best man at his wedding.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, he's my best friend, and we got to know each other freshman year at the University of Minnesota. I didn't know him previously. We grew up maybe an hour and a half away from each other. We're a couple of years apart in age. But
Who's older?
I am, yeah. So you probably could argue that both ways because it took me longer to get to college, and he got there a year before I did age-wise, but even though we were both freshmen. So he leaned on me because I was a 21-year-old freshman. So.
Yeah, but well, I mean, as one does these days. But I was talking to Jack after we finished recording. He said, who would be great for you to talk to? You should talk to Brock. And he told me that you recently became an agent. And at any rate, that was enough for me. But I'm scared to talk to you, and the reason I'm scared to talk to you actually has nothing to do with the fact that we haven't spoken before. I'm scared to talk to you because one thing that Jack did not mention is that you're a goalie. Yeah, and I played the game for a long time. Granted, not nearly at as high a level as you guys, but I played the game for a long time, and I do not understand the goalie mindset. Man, goalies are great guys, but you're a different breed.
For sure. No, I maybe a little biased, but I feel like I'm one of the normal ones. You can say that, and I was never too crazy into superstitions or had to stay in my lane. Don't talk to me before the game. But yeah, it was crazy how I got into it. I have a twin brother that played hockey, an older brother that played hockey, and somebody needed to be in the net because obviously it's a lot more fun to shoot on a goalie than an empty net, and so. Yeah, super mites probably a year or two after I started, I put on the pads because everyone was supposed to do it for a week. And, I was fortunate. I guess I was pretty good at it and fell in love with it. And so I never took the pads off until after I was done playing.
Well, obviously we'll get into, what you're doing as an agent and about, some of the stuff I'm thinking about around player development. But for starters, maybe just share a bit about your journey. Where'd you grow up? What did your development path look like? Did you come from a long line of high-level hockey players, or did that come out of left field? Just any color that you want to share would be fun to learn about.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm originally from Rochester, Minnesota. My dad never played any sports. Mom never played any sports. My dad played broomball and softball kind of after he moved out of his house in early 20s. And I remember when I was a young kid, he was a goalie in broomball, funny enough. But whenever he told me something, I wouldn't listen because it doesn't apply to hockey at all. Broomball hockey doesn't matter. But yeah, so I started playing hockey at 4 years old. I think, a lot of it, my older brother, I think was 6 at the time. And, I looked up to him, wanted to be like him. And so I kind of started it. And like I said earlier, super mites put on the pads, and that's when the goalie journey started. And, we would play hockey in the street, in the basement, on the pond, loved every second of it. So played youth hockey. I played football and baseball golf. Yeah, I think it's important to do all that as long as you can. I really do believe that playing those other sports helped me in a lot of what I did. I was a catcher in baseball, which, I tried to pride myself in not letting any wild pitches go by me. And so part of that's, the goalie mindset, but even, hand eye and just
Yeah,
being
that's like goalie practice, like all spring and maybe summer too. That's just goalie practice.
right. So yeah, just practice by baseballs getting thrown at me and have to stop them. So yeah, I did that. And honestly, I love football a lot. I played all the way until my ninth grade. I played my freshman year of high school. And then at that time, it was kind of, hey, the fall is extremely important for hockey. What do I want to do? And, like I said, I loved football. I had a ton of fun playing for 7-8 years, but I was better at hockey. And so I was passionate about hockey and moving on. And so decided to play hockey. So I played a year of high school hockey in Minnesota, which, as I'm sure you're aware, most people are aware, is a big deal in Minnesota to play for your high school and try to play at the XL Energy Center in the state tournament and in front of 18.
I'll make the same joke I made with Jack, and it's, I mean, for me, it's the hair, like the hair in the tournament when when the players skate out to the blue line or whatever, like that. I see those clips, man. I mean, that is aspirational.
For sure. I would have been on the no hair team if I would have made it to the state tournament. But so played my sophomore year, and then I actually chose to leave after my sophomore year to play junior hockey. And
did that actually mean like leave playing for your school or leave home?
Yeah. So both. So I left home, tried out for a North American Hockey League team, which, I had a coach, I played with a kid whose dad was a college coach, made a call to the team and said, hey, you got to let this kid try out. Like you're not going to regret it. You got to give him an opportunity. And, playing high school to juniors, it's a huge step, especially for goalies, the pace of the game, how quick the shots are. And so I went there, and first game warm-ups, I honestly, Jason, I don't know if I stopped at puck and warm-ups. Like I was like, this is going to be brutal. And all of a sudden when the puck dropped and the game started, something clicked, something changed. And, fortunate that I played pretty well. And so ended up making the team, and that started my journey in junior hockey. So I played 5 years of juniors, which is an extremely long time, and not a lot of kids do it, but I loved it. It was a ton of fun. And then my last year of juniors, I won the Robertson Cup, which is the national championship in the North American Hockey League. And I got my scholarship to play at the University of Minnesota then. And so kind of led me right into, I think we won in middle of May, and I started summer school at the U 3 weeks later. And so that, it was an easy, quick transition. And yeah, I grew up from Minnesota. My dream, my goal was to play for the University of Minnesota every Friday, Saturday night. I'd watch them on TV. I'd shoot pucks and have my brother shoot on me. The Gopher game would be on. I'd pretend that I'm, one of the players. And so I lived, breathed, I loved it. And, I was very fortunate that I got a scholarship to put on that jersey and be a part of that program. And so I played there. And after that, I got into coaching because I knew I didn't play a whole lot at the U. And so I knew, pro hockey wasn't going to be for me. And I didn't want to go down that route. And I had a torn labrum in my hip. That doesn't bother me day to day life, but going in the RVH and the VH goalie terms would put some pressure on my hips. And so
you saw my blank stare when you said those terms.
Yeah, somebody they'll hit home with a few people, but some people again will look at me like I'm crazy. But yeah, so it doesn't bother me day to day life, and I knew coaching was something I wanted to get into, and I had a couple coaches that impacted my life in such a positive way that they gave their time and energy to allow me to learn and develop and grow. And I was like, I want to coach. And so right after college, I got into coaching, from the development side and coach goalies. I wouldn't say I didn't like teach player skating, but I would work with players and give them, the perspective of, hey, when you're coming down on this side, this is what the goalie's thinking. And, you should shoot here because this is a tough save, or you should shoot here because the rebound's going to go right out to the slot. And now you're creating an opportunity for your teammate. And so being able to work that perspective, I think is valuable. And so I did that and did, goalie development from mites all the way up to junior and college kids. And then, I it wasn't enough maybe, and I wanted to get more involved in coaching, and so was able to coach in the North American Hockey League as an assistant coach, where I ran the D and helped with everything from power play, penalty kill, systems, things like that. And so, that was a ton of fun, just to expand the skill set and continue to learn and grow. And so I did that in junior hockey as a coach, and then unbelievable timing where the NCAA opened up 4 coaching spots, which would have been 2 years ago. And so I got offered a spot to coach at Bemidji State, Division I in the CCHA. And it's like 3.5 hours, 3 hours north of where I was living at the time. And so I did it. I moved up there. My wife lived in the cities, and I moved up there, and I was all in. Loved being a coach in the Division I life, and recruiting, and trying to win games, trying to build the program. And it was a ton of fun. Met a ton of people, recruited all over the country, from Western Canada, Eastern Canada, to West Coast, East Coast, down to Texas, everywhere in the Midwest, and just met so many great people, so many coaches, so many players. And so that kind of led me into my career now, where my wife and I, we have a now 9-month-old boy. She has a job in the hospital in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and my brothers both live in the cities. Her parents live in the cities, and so a lot of family around here. And she's got a great job. And so, for me, it was, how can I stay in hockey, but maybe, not coach or not have to be gone all the time. And so the agent side, I've been involved with agents, because it was my job as a college coach to talk to agents. How's Jack Ramsey? How's Brock Kautz? How are those players? Talk to them and just, realize that they help out players. It's just, in a different way, in a lot of perspectives. So I got into it. I absolutely love it, to use my experiences as a player, as a coach, to help families that know nothing about hockey, or even if they do, help them, kind of guide them in a direction, because everyone's path is different. Everyone looks at, oh, well, Johnny's playing in the USHL. Well, I need to play in the USHL. Well, no, you don't. You need to go to a league, a team that you're going to get the opportunity to grow, to develop, and then you might end up in the same spot playing college hockey or pro hockey, but how you get there is completely different. And so helping families navigate that it's been so rewarding. I'm addicted to watching box scores and seeing if my kids score, how they do. And so I get to watch them live, and, maybe, you take more of the results out of it. As a coach, you want to win, obviously, but now if you're just working with one player on a team, you're hoping that when they're on the ice and make an impact, they do some good things. And then when they don't, you can talk to them about it and give them the feedback of, hey, what were you thinking when you turned over this puck, or what were you thinking when you were doing this? And so yeah, it's, I've loved it. It's been an awesome career change. I miss a lot about coaching, as I knew I would, but to stay involved and continue to help impact kids has been my goal, even when I got into coaching. And so being able to do that now is really a blessing.
So I'll ask you some of the same questions I asked Jack. One is, just talk a bit about the development model growing up in Minnesota versus some other parts of the country and world. And it'd also be interesting just to understand how things have changed in the game today versus when you were coming up.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, Minnesota, again, kind of stands on its own, where high school hockey is such a big thing. And, you grow up, you watch your high school play, you're at the game, you're in the student section, you're idolizing some of those kids. And for me, I did it. There was a goalie that played at my high school who actually played for the University of Minnesota 5-7 years before me. And I watched him in high school. I'm like, I want to be like him. And so, but yeah, it's Minnesota, like, it's 24/7. There's so much hockey going around, from AAA teams to skill coaches, to skating coaches, to normal youth season. And it's just, for me, when I grew up, we worked on skating every single practice. We would do 4 lines, inside edge, outside edge. And I remember going up to the coach. I'm like, hey, like, I'm a goalie. Like, what am I doing? He's like, no, you're going to do this with everybody else. Like, you need to be the best skater on the ice. And so, I'm sitting there going, crossovers, outside edge, backwards, forwards with all my goalie stuff on. And I think it made the world of difference for me. Because as a goalie, if you can't skate, it's tough. And if you want to make saves, you got to put yourself in good spots. And same thing as a player, like if you can't get up and down the ice, you're left behind. And so just putting a huge emphasis on skating at a young age to be able to play the game with pace like you're supposed to, and just understand your edges. And so that was a huge thing that we focused on. And we did it without pucks, and then we did it with pucks, because obviously the game's played with a puck. And so we spent a ton of time on that. I mean, I think it helped out, our youth teams, we were always top 5 in state, I think every single year. We lost in the state championship one year. I think we got third one year. And so we competed with, the bigger cities, and then Rochester splits into 4 high schools, and they're all extremely average, unfortunately, but in youth hockey, we were good. And so yeah. So
was that, Brock, was that one of the drivers of leading you to think about juniors? Was that that the high school you were slated to go to wasn't very strong?
Yeah. So as a goalie, the strength of the schedule matters. Southeast Minnesota, I'm sure people have their opinions, but generally it's fairly weak. There's a lot of talented hockey players down there all over the world and different areas. But for me, it was, I felt that I needed just to leave to get tested as a goalie. And, the physical side of the game, I didn't have to worry about when I played juniors at 16, because I didn't get hit, whereas a 16-year-old playing in the North American Hockey League against 20-year-olds where you can fight, it's a lot different, And so for me, I think it was easier for my mom to shit me out, knowing that I could just stand in the blue paint, nobody would touch me. And if somebody did, my teammate would beat the crap out of them. But yeah, so that was definitely a driving force into leaving. But I didn't play a ton of games my first year, but just practicing with older kids, and just, the season was so much longer, and as opposed to high school, and practicing every single day at a high level. I think I learned a lot, I grew a lot, I developed a lot. And, I was definitely thankful that I did choose to leave.
What did you see growing up? If you looked around you to your left and your right, how involved were the parents, and how self-directed were the kids, and how does that compare and contrast to what you're seeing today?
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot for sure. My parents, again, they didn't play hockey, and so I think I was fortunate that they'd take me to the rink, and, I always wanted to go and do more. And my dad would, sometimes in a game, I would see where he's standing, and he'd be like, get your hands out. You got to keep your hand up, and things like that. But, wasn't like, super involved where it's like, hey, like you have to do this. Otherwise, you're not getting this, or things of that stature. But yeah,
it wasn't like pressing the camera with the suction cup to the to the glass at the back of your head, like a bunch of the goalie dads do today.
I see that all the time. The GoPro on the net, and I was just at a USHL camp. Like all these parents are recording and sending those videos to somebody, or saying, oh, Johnny had this nice goal, and so much stuff is on your phone and social media. But yeah, I think that's probably been the biggest change. Again, my parents were involved, but not overly involved. Hey, go try out for this team. If you make it, great. If you don't, we'll do something else. And so yeah, I mean, I even throughout youth hockey, I played AAA hockey in the spring and the summer, and I had to drive an hour and a half to practice, 2 or 3 times a week. And I don't know how my parents did it. My dad drove me, he'd work 10, 11 hours a day, and he'd get home from work, and we'd hop in the car, go up to an hour practice, and, get home at 10 o'clock at night. And, he'd wake up at 5 and go to work the next day. And so he, and I would fly to Toronto, Chicago, Winnipeg, all these places to play AAA tournaments, and never even, thought twice about it, because it was a fun experience. And yeah, today I think parents are a little more involved. And now that I deal with more parents, it's at a greater scale. When kids are in junior hockey is when, they don't reach out to coaches, but, in high school and youth, they reach out to coaches and say, hey, why is my son not not playing? Why do you get taken off the first line? Why does your kid get, more ice time and mine doesn't? My kid's better. And so, you hear it all the time. Well, hockey's political and this and that. And so, at the end of the day, you just got to put your nose down and just, work for your opportunities. And that's how I was raised. Nothing was going to be handed to me. And you want to get an opportunity, you better work your butt off and make sure that you deserve it.
Well, I hear different stories. I mean, I hear stories from people that say, oh, it was great. Like, my parents didn't have an athletic bone in their body, and, they were supportive and they would take me to wherever I wanted to go, but it was all on me and it all came from me, right? And that's how people should be. And then I also hear people say, oh, like, I was really fortunate. My dad played in the NHL. My grandfather played in the NHL. And growing up, the most valuable thing wasn't, wasn't them like getting me on the ice or anything. It was all the talks we had in the car on the way, like, and pointing out all these subtleties and nuances that I wouldn't have otherwise seen. Or even when we were just watching pro hockey at home, like, they would just point things out. And those were some of the most valuable discussions I had in my own development. What are some healthy ways that you've seen parents get involved in? What are some unhealthy ways that you've seen parents get involved? And if you're a parent that cares about your kid, how can you kind of self-monitor to make sure that you are giving your kid the support you need, but you're not operating to their detriment?
Right. No, like you said, I think watching hockey, like, to me, you got to be a student of the game. And, I think sometimes it's great and sometimes it stinks because you see Connor McDavid go out there and do Connor McDavid things. Well, now every 12-year-old thinks that they can be Connor McDavid, and Connor McDavid's one of one, right? And so, but yeah, I think watching hockey and saying, hey, did you see that, or why do you think he did that, and talk about it and get that mind spin in a way to grow and develop. And honestly, you might think I'm crazy, but like, I did play Xbox and video games, and I played a ton of NHL, and I just felt like I was good at NHL, but I had the awareness to like understand what was going on. And I think that helps too, just like you see the game, and, you got to be a smart hockey player if you want to continue to climb that pyramid. And, to go back to the parents, I think parents that, obviously played it and lived it, I think, kids are fortunate. Talk about Jack Ramsey, his dad, had a decorated playing career and a coaching career. And, I'm sure he taught Jack a lot of things, behind the scenes, and maybe not, hey, you need to go stick handle or skate, but let's get you thinking the right way. And I'll tell you what, Jack, his IQ of the game is next level. He thinks the game the right way, knew what to do with the puck before it got to him, and, could get himself out of trouble because he knew where his teammates were. And you add the skill to the game, then that makes for a great mix. And, that's why he played Division I hockey, played pro hockey. And so, and vice versa, like, you see parents are like, hey, you need to go score goals. You need to go do this. You need to go do this. And it's like, they don't maybe understand the perspective of, hey, like, in order for individuals to have success, you need to have team success. And a lot of kids think like, oh, I need to score 40 points, otherwise I'm not going to get noticed. And sometimes I believe that and think that that's the wrong way to look at it, because, you look at Sidney Crosby, like, it wasn't just him on the ice. He's a product of great teammates to produce and accomplish things. And that's why it's such a great sport, because, not one team or one player can make or break your team. Obviously, you have your top guy that scores the most goals and things like that, but, he's not going coast to coast and doing it without, puck support and teammate support. So yeah, I think, parents, probably maybe step overboard because they do think, maybe their kid needs to do, some crazy things to get noticed. And, like I said, my kid, 9 months old, so I haven't had to live the parent side of it, but
You're behind.
yeah, seriously, I got to get him on skates. And
I hope he at least has his own Instagram.
Seriously, get them on, put some fake elite prospect numbers on there, and maybe get them an agent here soon. But yeah, I think it's crazy for sure. And, hopefully that parents kind of understand you got to have passion and you got to have fun playing the game. And if you're just dropping your kid off and they don't want to be there, it's tough to grow and develop. And so, I hope, parents understand that. And, I think they're like, oh, well, if you don't skate 12 months, you fall behind, well, oh, he's playing on this AAA team. Oh, we got to play on this team, or this kid's doing this tournament. We got to do that tournament. And so, I think it's a product of the peers and what people think that they need to do. And, I don't think that's always the case.
When it comes to hockey IQ, is it something that can be learned, or is it that you either have it or not? And if it can be learned, what's the best way to teach it?
Yeah, I think you can learn it for sure. I think it's just a product of what you're doing, what you're working on, what your upbringing in, what you're surrounding yourself doing. I think, again, being a student of the game is so important, but, I think you need to learn by having somebody walk through it with you. I don't think, a 13-year-old can just flip on an NHL game and just be like, oh, that was a good play. Because sometimes plays happen that work out that weren't smart hockey plays. And so I think video work is important. I think that's a big part of the game, but also just, talking through different things. And, ice time is so valuable. It costs so much money that, like, coaches always want to get, the most out of it. We're going to maximize a 60-minute ice session by doing skills, things like that. But like being able to slow it down and talk about systems and learn the game at a deeper level. Like, I think, I'm a huge believer in having skill, but I think people don't understand what skill truly is. And I think people, you see people stick handle, pucks through, 20 obstacles on the ice. Like, is that skill? Like, yeah, that takes some skill, but, skill to me is having a puck get rimmed around on the boards. You pick it up and you make a play to your center, or, you got a D crashing down on you. It takes skill to get that puck out of the zone, like things like that. Like, it takes skill to learn where to put your stick on a back check to deflect a puck, stay at goal. And, blocking shots, yeah, if you want to do it, you can do it, but that's a skill. And so there's different perceptions of skill, in my opinion. And I just think that, that the game of hockey's changed a lot. And I think a lot of it is because, a lot of kids think it's great to see on TikTok of somebody stick handling and jumping and holding on to the puck. If that puck's on your stick for multiple seconds, you're probably going to get crushed. Like, again, McDavid's 1-on-1. Everyone saw his goal the other night of him toe pull, finds a, Draisaitl back door. And I think he was asked about it after. It's like, where did you learn that? And I think Draisaitl chimed in, is like, that's not learned, like he just has the instincts to do stuff like that. But like, again, that's 1-on-1. If you think that you can get the puck and just skate up and down the ice without passing it, stick handling it through 20 people, like that's not the way the game's supposed to be played. And, you can probably get away with it younger levels until there's checking. But then, once you continue to climb that pyramid, you got to play a different way.
So on the one hand, it sounds like hockey IQ is something that just gets learned by going out there and playing and being creative and trying stuff and getting to know all the little subtle nuances that just come from playing the game. Yet the narrative is that kids are playing too many games and they're not doing enough skills. But then what skills inevitably end up being is stick handling around the cones, like you just said, except cones aren't humans, right? And so how do you reconcile, because those are seemingly contradictory statements, right? So how do you reconcile that, and what's your view in terms of what the right answer is within that?
Yeah, don't get me wrong, you have to have skill to play the game. You have to be able to handle pucks. You have to be able to do it with pace. You got to be able to skate well, forward, backwards, transition, pivot, all those type of things, tight turn. You got to find a way to create space, and you do that by having a elite edge control and skating. And yeah, you do that with the puck on your stick, and how do you use your body against a defender so they can't take the puck away. Yeah, sometimes it calls for going under a triangle with that stick, and then you beat one guy, and then you make a pass. And so yeah, you definitely have to work the skill part of the game. But you definitely got to work that system side too, of really understanding, like this is this is where I need to be on a breakout. I need to be able to catch a puck on my backhand, make a play to the center of the ice. I need to work on my skill on tipping pucks and being net front and things like that. So I think there's just so much to learn and grow. And kids play it, they play a lot of games, and let's face it, like, that's the most fun part. Like, I don't think a kid says, oh, I'd rather go practice at 6 a.m. and work on skating.
No pucks. Yeah.
Or play a game. Like, I love playing games as a goalie too. And, I'm sure players are the same, but yeah, I think just, continuing to grow, year after year, stacking some development on top of, what you want to accomplish. And then, when you get into, your early teens and there's more systems of the game, understanding, the 2-1-2 forecheck or the 1-2-2, and coaches got to teach it the right way, and why. I think that's a big thing, is why would you want to do this? Why does your stick need to be here? If I'm F3, why do I not just go attack the person? Why do I go at an angle and use my stick in a good position? And understanding that stuff, I think, is valuable.
So it sounds like a lot of that needs to come from the coach. If you're a player who's in a position where you feel like for whatever reason you're not getting that from your coach, are there outlets for you to turn to? Are there ways for you to learn these things outside of the structure of your team?
Yeah, just like there's skills coaches, there's video coaches out there too, and there's guys that will look at your video and break it down, and like being an agent, like I'll do video with my players, and it's not so much, hey, like like you need to do this. Like, if you're playing for a coach, the coach tells you what to do, you got to do it if you want to play, whether you agree or disagree. But for when I do film with my junior guys or high school guys, I try to understand if they had a turnover, what did you see? Like, you came around as a D, you came around the net and you try to go cross ice and it got intercepted. Hey, what did you see? Well, did you see your strong side wall wide open? That should be the first option. Or hey, like what caused you to do this? And so I try to talk them through it, and I let them talk and say, hey, like, you're the one playing the game. Like, I'm not playing the game. Like, what were you thinking? And you're like, and a lot of times you're like, yeah, I shouldn't have made that play. I should have just done this. I'm like, exactly. So, like, let's build that into the brains and make sure that next time we do that, or, just, again, different things to help bring value, benefit, whether it's offensive side of the puck, defensive side of the puck, stick positioning. I'm not critiquing your D zone structure, because that's your coach's job, but I want to make sure that they're thinking the right way and understand that, hey, you want to play college hockey, your goal is to play college hockey. Well, then you get this puck on the boards, you better make sure that puck gets over the blue line, or it's on your teammate's stick. But if you turn it over, if you can't be trusted on the wall, why would a coach put you out there? Coach puts you out there in junior hockey because he trusts that you're going to do your job, and your job might be to not get scored on. Well, then don't get scored, and like, there's guys that are paid millions of dollars in the NHL to not get scored out. And, there's guys that are paid millions of dollars to score goals. So you better score goals. And so I think that kids need to understand that, because there's not 12 McDavids on the ice. There's one, and the pieces that fall around them. That's why you make championship teams, because you have the right roles, and people embrace the roles of penalty kill, blocking shots, getting chances. And if you chip in a goal, great. But if you get scored on,
I mean, that's one. I mean, I'm still pretty early, but that's one of the things that's been coming up in my discussions so far, that it isn't just, the biggest players or the ones with the most skill or the ones that can finish the most or whatever that end up making it to the furthest, that sometimes it's the role players who embrace their role and do that role better than anybody else. What are the implications of that, as, either from a dad or from a kid standpoint, as you're navigating the development path? At what point do you switch from just trying to get better at everything to actually starting to think about what my role might be, and then achieving mastery in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously at a younger age, you want to be as good as you can at everything. And, you want to play with skill. You want to play the right way. You want to win your battles. You might play power play. You might play penalty kill, things like that. But, I would say, oh gosh, I wouldn't know the age, but maybe like, for sure high school and, juniors, you better have a great identity of what you're good at. And, like, yeah, obviously your fourth line guys will show skill and things because you always need to be able to do that. But, if you're fourth line and you're on the forecheck, you better finish your hit and separate the D from the puck. And so I think, sometimes those roles just kind of fall into you. Maybe you don't even choose them. You're like, oh man, I love playing physical. I love blocking shots. I love playing on the penalty kill. And you just embrace that. And, as you climb, the ladder of the line chart, sometimes things change. But yeah, I would say, in youth hockey, obviously not needed, but kind of when you get into that high school prep stuff, you do have to be good at everything. But in junior and college hockey, for sure, college hockey, you definitely need to understand, colleges recruit different roles and, they want great hockey players, but you might have to play different styles, but that just goes back to having the skills to do it all.
And talk a bit about the rise of agents, the rise of advisors, what the difference is, when the right time is to be thinking about either or both of those things, and then just as a player, how to sort through the landscape and figure out what the right fit might be.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a good question. It's crazy how many advisors and agents kind of are now involved in hockey. And, for me, again, like I want to bring more value than just being labeled as an advisor or an agent. And by doing film, by understanding what it takes to play college hockey, to what the coaches want out of a player. And so for me, it's more, advisor agent, but mentorship too. Of, hey, like this guy gets it. Like I was in your shoes. My goal was to play junior hockey, play college hockey. I had to make sacrifices to do that. And this is what I learned along the way. Like there's, let's see, what 2011s, 2012s that have agents now, I would say. And
my kid's a 2012.
Yeah. And
we don't know anyone that has an agent.
And
but I can believe it though.
Yeah. A lot of them, I shouldn't say a lot.
And he's also, there's, it's all relative. He's playing the game at a pretty competitive level, but it's all relative, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, there's 2010s for sure have advisors and agents. 2011s and 12s are definitely starting to have them. And, I think you look at it from a couple lenses of what value does this guy bring to, my son from a hockey standpoint, but also like, I want great humans. Like I want to grow, not just grow the game of hockey, but like, I want great humans to learn, to develop and live life the right way. Cause I don't think there's enough of it out there. And so for me, just teaching the lessons of, hey, like you go to a camp, like you better be appreciative of your coach for giving you an opportunity to play. Like find him, shake his hand, say thank you, introduce yourself, because I think that goes a long ways in life, not even just in hockey. And so yeah, I would say, in high school, for sure, kids are looking at it and getting involved just because, some of them want to start that communication process of, like, I want to play juniors. Well, then let's make sure these junior teams are aware of who you are. And if you're not in, the marquee spot of, let's just say Minnetonka, Minnesota, or Edina, Minnesota, maybe everyone knows, like, how do you come out of the weeds in Southeast Minnesota and Rochester? Maybe it's like, for me, I had that coach make a phone call and I got an opportunity. And I tell kids all the time, like, I would love to place you on a hockey team. It's not how it works. I'll get as many opportunities and options for you, but at the end of the day, you got to step on the ice and you got to do your part. And I can't play the game for you. I can't score goals for you. I can't stop pucks for you. So you got to do your part, but I'm going to open up every door possible for you to have success. And then, at some point that kid's got to take ownership of their, own craft.
And what about the flip side? As an agent, what kind of kids are the right fit for, I don't know if you call it a practice that you're building, but the clients that you take on, like, what are the criteria? Is it an age thing? Is it an ability thing? Are there, are there other things that you screen for? How do you know if it's the right fit?
Yeah. So, I feel, a few things kind of go into that. I had, I guess, 04s just went to college. So now I have 05s to my youngest one, I think, is a 09. So, kind of, they're all in different stages of their career. Some are playing junior hockey, trying to look at the college process. Some are playing high school. Some are going to juniors this year. What junior teams, what opportunities, what tryouts, camps, things like that. But yeah, I think it's conversations of, hey, where are you at mentally? Where do you think you are in relationship to, what I believe your level is? If I am working with a kid that, maybe had 2 points his senior year of high school and says, I want to play in the USHL, that's to me, I'm only going to let them down. And so understanding, maybe more of the reality of kind of where they think they're at. And, you can tell when you talk to kids and parents, if they have good head on their shoulders and if, they're doing it for the right reasons. And, skill, obviously, everyone loves, amazing hockey players. But to me, like, the tier 2 kids need a lot of help and a lot of advice. And, tier 3 kids need there's a lot of tier 3 kids that could be playing tier 2. There's a lot of division 3 kids that could be playing division 1, whether it's timing, opportunities, never really given the right opportunity, maybe lack of advisor, lack of coach, lack of where they're playing. And so yeah, I think, to me, it doesn't necessarily matter kind of where they're at. It's more of, what type of kid they are, what type of family they are, and help them develop, from a young age all the way through that process to get to college.
Uh-huh. And then there's different schools of thought, because on the one hand, there's all these, quadruple A, quintuple, people keep adding A's to their, tournaments, right? Super series, like and then it's like, the scouts come to this one, the coaches go to that one, the coaches are on the bench. Oh, you got to go to that one. Like, oh, there's write-ups. Like, you need to have a good tournament, because if you do, then you get noticed. And then it's like, if you want to play on this set of teams, you need to be in these kinds of places, right? So on the one hand, it's like optics and visibility. On the other hand, it's like development and just getting the goods, right? Like, how much should you focus on the left side? How much should you focus on the right side? And how does that shift as you get older?
Yeah, for sure. Again, like the younger age, it's, colleges, junior teams aren't looking at kids that are Annams or playing, U13s. They're looking at kids that are going to be playing for them in a year or two. In colleges, there's a certain period, they can't talk to freshmen anymore. They can't commit these kids, until, their sophomore year going into their junior year. And so yeah, I mean, there's so much expectation on, developing at a young age that should be the number one focus. So, when you do go to those camps, you can show what you're capable of. And when you do get exposed to junior teams, college teams, that, you've put in the work, that you can put, a good foot forward in those types of things. And obviously you develop, all the way through, and everybody tries to continue to get better at all facets of the game. But yeah, kind of when you're in that high school, 9th, 10th grade, there's probably way more exposure that happens, and making sure that, when you go to those events, that you do make a good showing, because, it's people see it, and, you definitely don't get written off, but if you get a little check by your name as somebody to follow, it's always a good thing.
Uh-huh. And you mentioned the 2 points senior year. Like, what are the things that coaches and scouts care about? Is it points on the score sheet? Is it physical attributes? Is it certain, like in football, it's probably has to do with your 40-yard dash and your vertical jump and things like that. Like, what are the things in hockey that the coaches care about? And I'm sure it depends coach to coach, but anything you can speak to about the commonalities or the typical things, as well as maybe some of the, maybe some of the views that are out there as well, that maybe think different than the pack.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, like first and foremost, work ethic. How does this kid work? Does he bend his legs? Does he back check? Is he straight legged? Is he in the play? Is he not in the play? How is his body language? Does he miss his net and slam his stick on the boards and not back check? Does he not skate off hard on a line change? A lot of coaches look at that, and as you climb the ladder, everyone works hard. So that's a tough thing to differentiate yourself with somebody else. But what is a kid like? Is he a good teammate? Is he a bad teammate? That definitely plays a factor. When teams are building their culture, their team, they don't want that quote unquote cancer in their locker room that brings everyone down. And that's, to me, a big controllable of being a great teammate and doing things the right way. Skating is a huge part of it. If you can't get up and down the ice, you definitely fall behind. And hockey IQ has become a great part of it, because you can skate as fast as you want, but if you have no idea when to turn left or turn right or pass or not pass, and you get over the blue line and you just shoot because your shot's hard, it's tough to maybe coach that. So having the IQ, the understanding of how to play the game, I think it is helps a lot. And then just obviously you have to have skill to move. And again, going back to skill, like it means a lot of different things, and just being able to receive a pass on your backhand, make a pass going full speed, and play with pace, and do things the right way all over the ice, not just offensively but defensively as well. So I would say those are definitely main things that junior teams look at, colleges look at, and I think on top of it, having good grades and being a good student always helps. If you have similar kids that kid A is a good student and they're equal in skill, but this kid has better grades and this kid has worse grades, this kid's a better teammate, it's which one they're going to choose. And so you want to make sure that if you're competing with a kid, because so many kids are about the same, well, this kid's an awesome teammate, this kid works his butt off, this kid does all the little things, this kid's selfish. Well, I think anybody would know what coach or what that coach is going to choose.
And if the kids are hungry and the parents are able, there's countless skill coaches you can cut your kid to under the sun. In terms of doing stuff on your own at home, what advice do you have for players out there in terms of what they should be doing and how often they should be doing it?
Yeah, I think, again, there's some kids out there that want to shoot 1,000 pucks a day and want to stick handle for 20 minutes. And, like growing up, we were always shooting pucks or playing hockey because we just loved it that much. Or in Minnesota in the winter, so many kids have a rink in their backyard or a rink 2 minutes away that, hey, I'm going to go out there and skate for a little bit and handle pucks. And so you want to choose to do it if you're a kid. You don't want to feel like, oh, well, dad said I have to go shoot 500 pucks or I'll get dinner tonight. Well, that's not going to make them want to do it. And so I think doing things like that, I think help, I remember our youth coaches are like, hey, like, you guys watch TV at night? Well, why not stick handle for 10 minutes while you're watching TV? You can still watch, stick handles, or, hey, you do push-ups when you're, I couldn't tell you how many push-ups I did in my life when we were younger, because they're like, you better do 100 push-ups a night. And, kids can want to do it again, but, like, if you're just sitting there doing nothing, I think you can do a few things while you're still, doing nothing. And so I think having a great shot obviously always helps, stick handling. I think just being comfortable with the puck on your stick, I think helps. Kids have stride boards and things like that, again, might help. You don't want to overwork yourself. You don't want to burn out, because you got to have fun every time you're doing something for hockey. You embrace the grind, but you want to have fun doing it. And so as soon as you lose sight of that, it can be tough.
Well, it seems like, as the proliferation of skills coaches and the skill level comes up and the game gets more and more competitive, it puts more and more pressure on kids to keep up, more and more pressure to specialize earlier. Then you're seeing an increase in burnout. You're seeing an increase in overuse injuries that pop up. Is the are we watching a train crash in slow motion here? Is there a breaking point? Or I guess, what's your view on the state of the state and if we're heading on a good path?
Yeah, again, going back to earlier, I think playing multiple sports, I think it helps out a ton. There's kids that just 24/7 are always doing hockey travel because their parents just see the peers doing it and you're gonna fall behind. But I don't think you have to choose if you're all in on hockey until you're in high school, and if you realize maybe like, hey, this is, I think I'm capable of playing hockey after high school. Maybe now's the time that I choose. But even then, you still see kids playing, two sports. There's a kid in Minnesota that he's narrowed his school down for hockey, I think, to two of the top programs. And he's one of the best quarterbacks in the state of Minnesota. And he's just an athletic freak. And he's managed to do both and do both at an extremely high level. And so, obviously that doesn't happen all the time, but yeah, I think, I hope that we're not heading in a wrong direction, because I think the game is in pretty good hands with the people that are doing it at the highest levels. And, it's obviously changed with technology and training and everything like that. But, I hope that, you just hope that it doesn't cause injuries. So a lot of times you just got to listen to your body, which, I'm sure you can't tell your son, hey, how's your body feeling? You need a day off. Well, no, I want to go skate, but I think trying to listen to your body and give your time, adequate rest throughout the year. And, I remember after juniors, like I wouldn't touch the ice for a month. And I would work out and do that, but I wouldn't touch the ice because my body needed a break and a reset. And so it's no different. NHL guys do it the same thing. They take some time off and listen to their body, but still work out and stay in shape from that sense.
When it comes to the player development side of your job, what role does technology play, if any? How do you use it?
Yeah, so again, like everything is on video, especially junior hockey games are recorded. So, I tell my guys that, hey, if you want to do video with me, let's do it. Let's hop on, let's watch it, let's talk through it. I think there's platforms out there that break it down, and, colleges have those platforms to use. That
like cutting shifts.
Yeah. So there's a couple out there that do it already, and you can type in a kid's name, you can type in Jack Ramsey. You see all of his shifts, you see his puck touches, you see his shots, you see his goals, you see his hits, and you can just click on it and watch them. So that makes it easier for recruiting, for sure. When I was coaching, hey, what can you tell me about so-and-so? Well, you type his name in, you look at, his shifts. You don't have to watch a whole game start to finish. You only watch when he's out in the ice. Or, I want to watch all this kid's scoring chances. How is he getting them? Is it off the pass? Is he creating by himself? How, where is he at when he's getting these scoring chances? If I'm watching a goalie, let's watch all of his saves from, inside the house, the slot. Then we can expand on that. And so those platforms are extremely beneficial, not from just a recruiting side, but the development side, and learning and doing it in a proficient way. So you don't have to waste time watching the whole game, but just watching a shift. And, I know a lot of kids, I did it when I played. I would get the link and I'd rewatch it and be like, play it back in my brain. If I was there again, would I make that same play, or would I do something different? And so a lot of kids watch their, as they get older, watch their games back.
And if you look at the kids coming up, what are the biggest predictors that a kid coming up is going to be, is going to rise above the noise when he or she gets to the age that matters? And is there such a thing, given how much changes, through puberty and checking and distractions and when the kid just has more choices for how to spend their time?
Right. Yeah. It happens even in recruiting. You might, again, going back to the college, like you might think this kid is going to be really good in 3 years, so I'm going to give him a full ride. But then, 3 years down the line, he never developed, and, this kid passed him. And so, it's always something that, like this kid made, you have tryouts this spring, well, my teammate made it, I didn't. Well, I'm going to use that as motivation. And then next year, I'm better than this kid and I make it. So you never know, kids kind of pass each other all the time, whether they use, being cut as a motivation, or sometimes kids make a team and, they're like, oh, I made it. And now, the work's done. I think complacency is a horrible disease in hockey. It's a horrible disease in the world. As soon as, you get complacent, happy where you're at, somebody's coming after you. I think it's the easiest thing is to get to the top. The hardest thing is to stay there. And so understanding that, I think the motivation to always become better, those kids are the ones that are going to have success.
Are there warning signs when, like, can you pick off a kid that's going to burn out before it happens?
Wow. I guess I wouldn't. No, probably not. I mean, I haven't, maybe there's factors that go into it. Maybe parents that are way too involved, or maybe just if you're with a kid that long and you're like, oh, this kid, for the past 2 weeks has been just not trying on the ice anymore, or not paying attention. Like maybe he's lost interest if you're around, kids long enough, I think. But for me, I guess in my job, I haven't seen that yet, just because the kids where they're at, they're old enough where they understand what they want to do. And so, if I find those factors out, Jason, we'll talk about it.
And it seems like, and again, my oldest is only 13, so I don't know what I don't know, but it sure seems like from a big picture standpoint, the game is changing quite a bit as it relates to some of the changes with I'm not even going to get the words right. It's the major juniors, or the kids from juniors in Canada now being able to play NCAA where they couldn't before. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the biggest changes that have been happening, and then what your predictions are just in terms of what the implications will be looking forwards for players coming up.
For sure, yeah. So, the CHL, they are allowing kids to play college hockey, which it's never been before. So we're on year one of that, probably 8 months in. And so, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it was over 200 now of those kids that are committed to college hockey, whether they're, I think there's maybe 100 some going in next year maybe, but kids committed to the future. And so, that takes spots away from Americans and takes spots from the North American Hockey League and other leagues, because schools are up there recruiting because there's talented hockey players up there for sure. And so now, I think things will change, because I think you'll see more Americans go up there, where, my dream was to play college hockey. And, I talked to a major junior team when I was younger, but, for me, I wasn't going to allow me to play my goal of playing college hockey, but now it's different. So now you could go up there and get treated great, play a lot of games, and go to college hockey. And so, I think now, I think that league is still above the rest. They put a ton of talented hockey players in the National Hockey League, and they have a ton of resources up there to provide development and growth and exposure and things like that. But I think again there'd be more Americans that will go up there, and kind of makes recruiting a little harder, just because there's way more teams out there that you got to pick from, more players that you got to pick from. But it also made it a lot harder for kids to play Division I hockey now, unfortunately, just because you open it up to so many more kids.
And Brock, I guess shifting to your stuff, what is the life of an agent look like, and also how does that evolve from when you're starting out to as you get more established as an agent over time?
Yeah, for sure. So I started from zero, and we'll call it my team, my group of clients. I've grown it.
It sounds like being a wealth manager kind of. Like when you come in, you got to build the book. But if you build the book and you treat them right, then over time it becomes like an annuity, right?
Right, for sure. And I'm a firm believer that as you kind of get into it, I'm not going to say it gets easier, but I think the opportunity to talk to more people, maybe work with more people, I think will be evident. I try to pride myself in working with kids the right way, treating them how they deserve to be treated, and giving them every opportunity to play at the highest level that they're capable of playing at. And so it's every part of the year brings a different challenge, and now it's, hey, let's try to get these kids in junior hockey. Then the null draft happens in about 15 minutes. And so, see if kids get drafted, if they don't, what camps should they go to, and kind of work through the camp tryout process. And then in September, it can be crazy because, you're going to have kids that play well and do good things. And then you're going to get a call that says, hey, this team just cut me. Now what? And then it's, talking to different coaches saying, hey, would you have interest in this player? He's a great kid. He provides this value. Do you have a spot on your team for him? And so different parts of the year require different challenges. You work through, and then, you work through the course of the season of, hey, you're on the fourth line in September. That doesn't mean you're going to be on the fourth line in January. And so trust in the process, make sure that, hey, you're going to practice every day. You're the hardest worker. You have the best attitude. You're doing all the little things. So when you get your opportunity to play more, you take advantage of it. And again, complacency. You get kids that move up the ladder on the line chart. Well, then sometimes they start playing a different way. When in reality, they got there because they were working hard. They were doing these things. So I'm in year one of doing it and just helping kids out. My belief, could I go out and get 100 kids easily? But, I think I'm at 22 right now, and I get to talk to them all the time. I get to know what they're doing, how they're doing, what's going on, and be what I feel is a factor in their development, in their career. And there's some advisors that think differently, and, nothing against them, but a lot of them have, 75, 100 clients. And that's, our company's belief that, we want to build strong relationships, have great communication. And, another thing that I think is one of the best qualities to have is, like, your best ability is availability. And, I pride myself in being available. If a kid calls, I want to be able to answer and talk to them. And it's no different than hockey players. You want to play, well, you better make sure your grades are good, you're healthy, you're doing all the things. So when your name's called, you're able to play. And if you're not able to play, well, guess what? This kid he's going to play. You see it all the time, the next man up mindset or opportunity. And, unfortunately, injuries are part of the game. But when somebody gets injured, it sucks. But guess what? It gives an opportunity to somebody else. And so that's kind of where things are at for me, and working through, there's some glamorous parts of, phone calls being made of, hey, I want this kid on my team. I'm like, awesome. And then, there's other parts where, hey, do you have interest in this kid? No. That's unfortunate. But again, I tell my kids, like, I want to open every door possible, but, your job is to give me the data to sell. I can't sell if if you're playing terrible, you're turning the puck over, you can't skate, you can't do this. I can't sell you to a coach and say, hey, you should take this kid. But you're scoring goals, you're playing hard, your coaches say you're a great teammate. Now you can call a coach and be like, hey, I got something for you.
Great. Well, gosh, this was such a far-ranging discussion. Is there anything I didn't ask that you wish I did, or any parting words for listeners?
No, I think, yeah. I mean, I love talking to people like yourself, hungry people, just people in the hockey world that, again, talking earlier with you, like, you can always learn something from somebody. And, I talk to so many people, there's a lot of people that I don't even work with or clients with, and just to give advice to and pick their brains about, this showcase or this team or that team. My whole goal, dream, passion is helping people, helping families, helping players. So, I guess if there's one thing that I hope, it's, I can continue to do that as long as I can. And, I think, I'm grateful that I got to hop on here with you, and I appreciate your time. And, I think it's hopefully has benefited you as much as it benefited me.
Yeah, no, it was great. And I'm with you. I think if you find something you love, you still work hard, but it makes it easier because you want it, which also has a lot of parallels to what we were talking about with, with kids on their development path too, right? It's like you gotta love it. Just, I mean, it's common sense, but it's
Sure.
easy to forget when you're chasing.
Right. 100%. Sometimes you question it at 6 a.m. when you're on the rink. Usually you do it because you love it.
Well, thanks again, Brock. Best of luck.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.